Here in southern Alberta, we feel the impact of decisions that seem to be made with Toronto or Ottawa in mind, and they don't always appear to be in the best interest of Albertans. There are policy groups across our country working to improve life for all Canadians through research and the communication of sound policy ideas. Joining me to talk more about his recent visit to Lethbridge is Michael Van Pelt. He's the president and CEO of Cardus. Mr. Van Pelt, welcome to Bridge City News.
Hey, thank you. It's a great place that you're in. Love being in Lethbridge, love being in Medicine Hat. Been in 10 cities across Alberta over the last 2 weeks. What a great time.
Well, we're glad that you could visit us in our wonderful neck of the province here, Michael. But can you just give us an idea of what is the focus of Cardus?
So Cardus is in some ways a very traditional think tank in Canada. We focus on public policy issues. We focus on research to advance those public policy issues, help educate a larger population about what the kind of main and central issues that we're facing here in public life. And that could range on childcare issues. It could range on gambling issues. It could deal with religious freedom issues. There's just multiple issues that governments are responsible and that a larger public square is responsible. And we're in those spaces and contributing to that public dialogue and helping people to kind of shift their thinking or be more clarified about their thinking. That's what a think tank does. We're interesting as well because we're faith-based. We come out of a religious tradition. The basic idea is that in our case, the Christian tradition actually does have something to offer public life today that can be done in a very flourishing way. That's Cardus in a nutshell.
So what led you to the mission of Cardus, and how did you get started with the organization?
So ironically, I'm actually its first full-time employee. We're about 22 years old. And the history of think tanks in Canada is a little bit different. So in the United States, the think tank tradition is very, very strong. It's very, very deeply embedded into the kind of public and political dialogue. Government leaders, municipal leaders, the public service are very much reliant on the research and the public opinion of many, many players in the think tank space. In Canada, that is actually a less popular kind of way of engaging the public environment. That's changing now. So you've seen a rise of many, many think tanks in Canada. We're part of that overall development. And it's really, really interesting. What I love about it is here is a charitable organization called Cardus, which is funded not at all by governments, which is funded by an interested population that says, we've got ideas about how the public square can improve, can do better than it is today. And your job, Michael, is to kind of put that into good order, do good research, make sure you've got good backing on your ideas, and then advance them into a public square. And that could be to government leaders, that could be to business leaders, that could be to civil society leaders and organizational leaders. That's really that kind of unique space that a think tank is in today. We're not the aggressive, angry lobbyists. We're not the academic institution that sits in, let's say, the stereotypical ivory tower. We're in that day-to-day messy business with ideas that actually matter to people.
So with all the research you do and the information you gather, who do you see as the demographic that Cardus speaks to?
So essentially, Cardus communicates with those kind of leaders in society that have the ability to, as it were, move an idea to the next stage. So think about in Lethbridge, think about your mayor, think about municipal leaders, think about business leaders who, when they are concerned about something, that needs to be paid attention to, whether we kind of like it or not. Think about many of your Chamber of Commerce leaders or other civil society leaders or social service leaders. These are people who have been given the responsibility to provide leadership in a community. And how do we help them exercise that leadership? That means that we need to do really, really good research, that they've got tools and backing to know how to suggest good improvements. That's really the kind of market that we're kind of targeted to as a think tank, in some ways really no different than most think tanks in Canada.
So when you were in Lethbridge, can you just tell us what the discussion was all about?
So this is, I love this because this is a really kind of interesting engagement that we are in. And Lethbridge was one of 10 cities that we are wanting to advance this particular idea. Cardus has long been one of the leading think tanks looking at educational choice in Canada and educational reform in Canada. And essentially, we were making the argument that it is now time for the business sector and business leaders to pay a lot more attention to the quality of K to 12 education. Remember, we've just come out of a COVID period. Families and parents have been able to kind of have a little look under the hood of kind of what our education system is looking like. There's a little bit of an unease about that. Business leaders, they're looking for a certain kind of employee, and they're struggling with that. And when we were researching this area, we were saying there's a bit of a disconnect. So you as a business leader wake up in the morning, and what kind of skills are you concerned about? Yes, you're concerned about a labor shortage in Canada, but you're also concerned about a skills shortage. Okay, what is that skill shortage? Here's what it is. It's numeracy rates. It is literacy rates. It is soft skills. It is emotional capacity. It is relational dynamics. It is coming to work on time. It's being able to deal with stress environments in intense workspaces, retail, service sectors, all of those kind of things. When you actually think about those skills, those are not skills that you learn in a post-secondary environment. Those are skills that you are being taught, and behaviors and character that is developing really in a K to 12 environment. And we're saying, business leaders, you need to pay attention to that, because yes, you're really concerned about that. We get that. But the kind of technical skills that may be taught out of college or employment transition funding from a federal government, that's not going to get at this answer. The way you will get at this answer is actually focusing your concerns and challenging K to 12 education to up their game, to perform at a higher level and help build some of those missing skills that employers are thinking about. So that's the one argument that we were making as we traveled across Alberta. But the second argument that we were making, let's say we come to an agreement that this is a concern. This is a real concern. How do we actually solve that problem? And here's where Cardus was advancing the idea that if you really want to solve that problem, you can't just rely on big systems to do so. You can't just rely on a very large government system here as Alberta education is largely. You need educational choice. You need innovation. You need options. And as we grow those options to a larger piece of the overall sector, as we grow enrollment in that educational choice space, that is going to have the benefit of improving the whole sector. So that was essentially our two-piece argument. Number one, there's certain skills that you need, and they happen in K to 12. Let's start paying attention to that. If you really want to make serious improvement, number two, in the education system, you're going to need to build a larger sector of educational choice options that's going to challenge the whole sector to improve. That's what we were in Lethbridge for.
Now, on your website, you are upfront about being Christian. Why do you think this matters in what you do?
The Christian tradition is actually a really creative tradition. It doesn't just speak about what, let's say, your and my kind of spiritual commitments are internally. It actually has a vision for kind of all of life. So when you had the very idea of love God and love your neighbor, well, what does it actually mean to love your neighbor? It means that you need to care for them. You need to work hard to create environments where they too can flourish, not just your own flourishing. So when I think about this idea of loving your neighbor, I immediately connect it to how do we think about building a flourishing public life together? Let's remember, not everyone is committed to a religious kind of commitment. Some people have no religious commitments at all, or they have, let's say, a secular religious commitment. There's multiple religious communities. How do we actually live together kind of in common, having a common life together, but recognizing those kind of diversities? And the history of Christianity has actually very positively developed a way of living together in that way that can be flourishing, where you actually can love your neighbor as yourself. Even in business, the very expression of business is, Naveen, how can I serve you with a need that you have?
Mm-hmm.
when you think about that, that's not actually a motive for profit. That is a motive for service. So even at a business level, the primary interest is what I would call nearly a religious impulse. How do I love my neighbor as myself? And the way I do that is when Naveen has a need, I can help you. How can I serve you? Just even think about the language. So that was just an illustration about how connected our religious commitment is to the day-to-day life of public life and how flourishing that can be.
And many religious groups have schools to educate their children, so that obviously, like, there is some choice. Can you talk about your opinion on choice in education? Like, should we have choice, or like, should education be one size fits all?
It's a great question. Let's look at a little bit of the data in Alberta. That will help us. So right now, basically, you have about approximately 10.5% of the school enrollment in Alberta that is represented in what I call independent school environments. Those are non-government school environments. So they could include faith-based schools, they could include charter schools, they could include, let's say, a Montessori school, they could include some of the elite schools, or they could include homeschooling. The rest, the 89.5%, really is made up of three government-run systems: the public system, the Catholic system, and the Francophone system. And what I'm kind of arguing is that 10.5 probably in Alberta should grow to kind of 25% of overall enrollment. But yes, inside of those independent schools, that educational choice space gives opportunity not just for religious communities to educate as they see consistent with their religious tradition. That's been thankfully a longstanding privilege in Alberta, but that can also grow into specific curricular kind of interests or pedagogical approaches. Just for example, the rise of STEM here in Alberta. You've seen a number of the charter schools being focused on science, technology, engineering, and math as a priority in their education system. So it's not just the religious diversity that we want to respect. We do want to do that. We want to encourage that. That is actually a good, not a negative. But there are many other ways of educating. And in an environment where the world is changing so fast, we need innovation and creativity in how we educate. And our argument is let the parents actually kind of generate that and kind of animate it and see where that goes.
So you feel that competition in education won't necessarily decrease the quality of public education. Would it perhaps improve it?
I, you use the word competition, and let's go for that. But let's remember that's a bit of an economic term. I would actually go just diverse options. When you have diversity and people can see many different ways of doing things, that can animate improvement elsewhere. So I'll give you an example. When you saw in Alberta the first kind of conversations around charter schools, thinking about how to do STEM in a different way in a K-12 environment, that prompted a whole other discussion among some of the government schools about how they could actually deliver those goods as well. And I go, bingo, that's wonderful. That's where you have a situation where a smaller body was doing something really, really creative, and it was duplicated in larger environments. Big systems have harder times doing innovative things. The same is in business. When you have really big companies, they oftentimes they don't have the kind of nimble character of smaller, kind of more innovative companies. Same principle here. So I think it's actually a good, and many people are concerned that if you grow a independent sector or an educational choice, it is going to kind of challenge the larger government system. Actually, the reverse is true.
Oh,
And we need to start thinking about that and not be fearful of it. So don't blow up the system. We're not interested in kind of taking an American kind of angry blow up the system approach. Not at all. What we need to do is an incremental approach here that just gives a little bit more diversity. We're saying somewhere 20-25% of enrollment, and then just see how innovation flourishes, see how choice flourishes, see how parents think about the options provided them. And it's going to be a good thing.
we're almost out of time, but I really want to squeeze in this one last question because I feel it's very important. What would you say to parents questioning what their children are being taught in local schools and around the country?
Yeah, it's a good question, and it's obviously a very challenging and in some ways a poignant question today. My approach is, do we want to fight about, do we want to debate all of these issues, or do we want to allow diversity to happen? My default would be is in the end, the parent, the family has got the initial and the primary impetus to take responsibility for this kind of education. And you will, when you have no choice, when you have no options, you are going to create environments for bitterness, for disagreement, for conflict. Why do we need to do that? Why can't we just open up a little bit more educational options and allow those differences to live together? They can. History shows us that's possible. So I'm actually not going to buy into even the premise. I'm saying I'm not interested in having those debates and having those dialogues. I think we can create a common good together by giving families a diversity of choice that they can raise and educate their kids in a public space together, but within their own kind of educational commitments. That would solve a lot of the problem that we're seeing, kind of creating these undue kind of bitterness spaces that we're kind of dealing with today. We don't need to have that happen.
Well, we're out of time for today, Michael, but thank you so much for joining us for this interview.
Just a delight to meet you. And hey, great place to be in Lethbridge. Thanks so much for hosting me there.
Absolutely awesome. That was Michael Van Pelt, President and CEO of Cardus. He joined us from his office in Hamilton. I'm Naveen Day. On behalf of all of us here at Bridge City News, thanks for watching.